Doctors studied my reports for years, but they never asked the most important question. They looked at my blood pressure logs. They admired my steady pulse. They circled numbers in red ink and used words like remarkable, protective, low risk. A few of them even leaned back in their chairs the way people do when they think they've found a tidy story. But the question they never asked was the oldest one. What did you eat when nobody was selling health in a bottle? Not what pills I took, not what procedure I had, not what app I used to count steps. Just what was in your hands every day for decades before convenience became the religion. I've lived long enough to watch medicine change its clothes 100 times. I've watched it become sharper, faster, cleaner. I've watched it save people who would have died when I was a child, and I've also watched it forget what it cannot patent. I am 99 years old, and people ask me why I never had a stroke. They ask with that soft fear in their voice, the fear people have when they've seen someone's life split in half in a single afternoon. They ask as if I carry a secret in my pocket, and if I open my hand, it will make them safe. I don't carry a secret. I carry a memory. When I was small, we didn't have cardio. We didn't have neurology. We had an old word for a person who suddenly couldn't speak right, or couldn't lift an arm, or whose mouth pulled sideways like a curtain caught in wind. We didn't call it an emergency, we called it a turning. And we didn't speak of it loudly, because in a village, loud talk invites trouble. You learn that early. I was born in a time when people cooked what grew and saved what lasted. We didn't shop. We gathered, we traded, we stored, we fermented. If a plant helped your belly, you didn't call it medicine. You called it supper. Supplements didn't exist. We didn't have bright labels promising years. If something worked, it worked slowly, quietly, like a steady hand on your shoulder. My grandmother, she was the kind of woman who could look at your face and tell what your stomach was doing. Never spoke in theories, she spoke in habits. Don't make your blood angry, she would say. I didn't understand that phrase for a long time. How could blood be angry? Blood was blood. Now, after nearly a century of watching people rush, I understand exactly what she meant. Angry blood is thick blood, tight blood, blood that doesn't move kindly. Blood that scrapes along the inside of you instead of gliding. Blood that carries too much sugar, too much smoke, too much salt, too much worry. Blood that turns your vessels from soft paths into stiff pipes. I have seen what angry blood does. I have seen it in neighbors, in cousins, in my own husband's brothers. One day they were talking. The next day they were not the same people. And so when I hear a title like 0 strokes for 6,000 years. One root. I don't laugh. I don't scoff. I also don't believe any plant is a miracle. What I believe is simpler. There are foods that keep the body from panicking. There are foods that keep it from hardening. There are foods that teach it patience. The root I'm going to speak about was never a headline where I came from. It was not exotic. It was not rare. It was not hidden behind glass. It was just there, in the kitchen, in the hands of old women, in the steam rising off a pot. We called it garlic, not the powder in a shaker, not the odorless capsule, the real thing, the clove that makes your fingers smell like you've been alive. In my childhood, garlic was not a remedy. It was a way of cooking beans so they didn't sit like stones in your belly. It was a way of keeping meat from tasting tired when winter stretched too long. It was how you made broth feel like it had strength. But the elders trusted it for another reason they didn't say too loudly. They trusted it because the people who ate it regularly tended to stay whole. That was the phrase. Staying whole meant your mind stayed attached to your face. Your words stayed attached to your thoughts. Your legs stayed attached to your will. You might get old, yes. Your back might bend. Your hands might become knotted. But nothing failed suddenly. My body wore down slowly. I aged without collapsing. When I was a young woman, I married a man who didn't like garlic. He said it was for poor people. He liked white bread, sweet pastries, and salted meats when he could afford them. He liked food that disappeared fast on the tongue. At first, to please him, I cooked the way he liked, and I watched what happened. Not in a dramatic way, not like a punishment, but gradually, as years moved, his blood pressure began to climb. His ankles began to swell in summer. His sleep became shallow. He would wake with a pounding in his head and call it just age. Then when he hit his 60s, he had what the doctor called a warning, a transient episode. His hand went numb. His speech thickened for a few minutes. He sat very still afterward, ashamed of his own body. It passed. That's the cruel thing. It often passes. And then people forget. I didn't forget. I went back to what my grandmother taught me. Not with lectures, not with fear, just with cooking. I started putting garlic back into our food the old way, crushed, then rested a little before heating, though I didn't know the science words then. I only knew the smell changed when you let it sit after crushing, as if the clove was waking up. The elders would say, "Let it breathe." I used it in soups, in lentils, in stews, with greens, sometimes raw, rubbed on bread with a little oil when the stomach was strong enough. And something happened that I can't prove in a neat line, but I can tell you what I saw. His head stopped pounding as often. His hands warmed again. His face looked less tight, as if the skin itself had unclenched. Did garlic save him from everything? No. He still carried the habits of his youth, and they left their marks. He died at 81, peacefully, at home, not split apart by a sudden stroke. But he was not me. He had smoked for many years. He had loved sugar. He had loved rushing. I'm not telling you this to make garlic into a saint. I'm telling you because it was the first time I watched food change the direction of a body. Decades later, I began hearing modern people talk about garlic as if they had discovered it. They spoke of blood thinning, of cholesterol, of blood pressure. They spoke of antiplatelet activity and endothelial function. Those are their words, not mine. But the meaning underneath is familiar. It means the same thing my grandmother meant when she said, "Don't make your blood angry." Modern science, when it bothers to look, has noticed that compounds in garlic, especially when the clove is crushed, can influence how blood behaves, how vessels relax, how inflammation quiets down. Not as a hammer, as a nudge, and that is why the elders trusted it. They trusted what nudges the body in the right direction day after day. Because in a village, there is no rescue helicopter. You learn prevention without calling it that. You live in such a way that you don't force your body into emergencies. Then the modern replacements came. First came the convenience versions, powders, salts, tablets. They promised garlic without the smell, without the taste, without the social inconvenience. It made people laugh to talk about odor, as if it were a disease. But the smell was part of the honesty. The smell meant you had eaten something real. Then came the bigger replacements, the pills for pressure, the pills for cholesterol, the blood thinners, the little daily tablets that people take with their coffee like a ritual. I am not against those medicines. I have seen them save lives. I have held the hands of friends who would not be here without them. But I have also watched what happens when people treat medicine as permission. They take the pill and keep living the same way. They keep their blood angry and they ask the pill to negotiate with it. That is not what garlic did for us. Garlic was not a permission slip. Garlic was part of a whole way of eating that kept the body from needing negotiations in the first place. And garlic was not the only root or bulb we leaned on. There was another, quieter one, ginger. Ginger came into our kitchens when bellies were heavy, when winters were damp, when joints complained, when nausea rose like a tide. We didn't use it like a detox. We used it like a small fire. The elders trusted ginger because it warmed circulation without making the heart race. It settled the stomach without stopping it. It made the body feel as though it could move again. Later, I learned modern people talk about ginger in terms of inflammation and blood sugar and digestion, and sometimes even blood pressure. Again, they're words. In my own life, ginger was what kept my digestion steady as I aged. And digestion matters more than people think when they talk about strokes. Because when your digestion is poor, you don't absorb well. You crave quick energy. You reach for sweets. You eat too much salt because your tongue is tired. Your body starts swinging between hunger and heaviness. The blood becomes restless. So ginger for me was not about being cured. It was about staying steady. And what did modern products replace ginger with? Little tablets for indigestion, fizzy powders, strong antacids that quiet the burn but also quiet the stomach's natural work if used too often. Again, sometimes those things are needed, but the old way was slower. A slice of ginger in hot water, ginger in soup, ginger cooked with beans, a patience that let the body finish its own tasks. There was also hawthorn, berries, not a root. We used it as food more than medicine in teas and preserves. The elders said it helped the heart feel less burdened. That was their language. Not romantic, practical. Modern people later looked at hawthorn for heart function and blood pressure support, though it is not something you mix casually with medications. In a village, you didn't stack things. You did one thing and watched. And there is the pattern. The pattern is not one magical ingredient. The pattern is attention. I'm aware the title says, "Why is every cardiologist hiding the clinical trials?" I'll tell you what I think gently, because I have spoken with cardiologists. I have sat in their rooms. I have listened to their careful voices. Most of them are not hiding anything. They are busy. They are trained to use tools that work fast and predictably in large populations. They are trained to manage emergencies and risks that can be measured. A plant is not a pill. A clove of garlic is not the same from one crop to the next. A person's diet is not the same from one household to the next. A habit is hard to standardize. Clinical trials like clean edges. They like single variables. They like something you can count and sell and repeat. Food is messy, and because food is messy, it is often pushed into the corner as lifestyle, as if lifestyle were a hobby. But I also understand why people feel suspicious. Because there are studies, there have been many over the years on garlic especially, looking at blood pressure, cholesterol, circulation, inflammation. The results are not always dramatic, but they are often consistent enough to be interesting. And yet you will not see garlic leading the evening news the way a new drug does. That is not necessarily because of a cover-up. It is because nobody gets rich from telling you to crush a clove and wait 10 minutes before cooking it. Nobody can trademark your grandmother's soup. An industry likes what it can own, so the contrast is not evil doctors and pure plants. The contrast is speed versus patience, convenience versus daily care, a system built to treat events versus a life built to prevent them. Over my years, I noticed something about the people who aged well. They didn't chase youth. They didn't chase biohacks. They didn't believe the body was a machine to be bullied into performance. They fed it regularly. They walked. They slept. They held their worries the way you hold a hot cup, carefully so you don't spill it inside yourself. And their food had bitterness and sharpness and bite, garlic, greens, beans, onion, herbs, broth made from bones or from roots, depending on what you had. Fermented things, not because they were trendy, but because they lasted and they helped the belly. When people ask about my skin at my age, I almost laugh because skin is the least interesting part of a long life. But yes, my skin did not fall apart quickly. It thinned like everyone's. It wrinkled like everyone's. But it didn't suddenly become paper overnight. My joints, too, they complained. Of course they did. I carried water, I worked, I raised children, I knelt on hard floors. My fingers stiffened in cold weather. But nothing failed suddenly. My body wore down slowly. I aged without collapsing, and I attribute that not to a miracle root, but to a steady way of eating that kept inflammation low enough that the body didn't have to scream. I will say one more thing because it matters, and it's not romantic. I didn't drink much alcohol, I didn't smoke, I didn't eat like a celebration every day. Sugar was rare when I was young, and by the time it became common, my tongue had never learned to depend on it. Those habits, too, are roots, not the kind you dig from soil, the kind you grow in yourself. If you want the most honest lesson I can offer, it is this. Ancient remedies worked because they worked slowly. They were woven into meals, not swallowed in panic. They were repeated in ordinary days, not saved for emergencies. They didn't force the body, they kept it from being forced. Aging is not a disease, it is a long process of wearing. Cloth wears, wood wears, stone wears. The difference is whether it cracks suddenly or softens gradually. Speed destroys the body. Speed in eating, speed in stress, speed in anger, speed in sleeping too little and calling it ambition, speed in living as if you have another body in storage. My life was not perfect. I had grief, I had hunger years, I had fear, I had children sick with fever in nights when there was no doctor. But I had something else too. I had patience, and I had a kitchen that smelled of real things. So when you hear about one root, I understand the desire. People want one key, one simple answer. I cannot give you that, but I can tell you what I did. I ate in a way that did not inflame me. I kept my blood from becoming angry. I used the sharp plants, the ones that make you feel them, because they kept my body awake in a quiet way. And when the world began replacing those plants with powders and pills, I did not reject modern medicine. I simply didn't abandon what had carried me this far. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't say, try harder. I would say, don't interfere so much. Let the body do its work. Feed it, and then step back. That is how I arrived at 99 without a stroke. Not by fighting time, not by outsmarting death, just by living in a way that didn't corner my body into sudden disasters. In the end, I didn't try to stay young. I just didn't hurry my aging. And I didn't make my blood angry.